The topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the host and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
Born to be alive. The wise words of Patrick Hernandez, born to be alive, and no time like the present. Welcome, you're listening to Until Now with Rosie Pekar on W4CY Radio. If you wish to join the live chat, go ahead straight across to w4cy.com and you'll see a link. Click on it on the right-hand side and join the chat live now. Now today, interestingly enough, those of you that have been listening to me am aware I have a role as a professional butt kicker. And that's not from my years of law enforcement and investigations. I had over 16 years of that. That's from my role as a feel-good facilitator, finding more ways to feel good and less ways to feel bad and getting rid of that BUT, which is an Aussie acronym. You've already worked out by the accent today. It's Australian, it's certainly not American, and it's not somewhere down south, that's for sure. And BUT is those bloody useless thoughts that we like to fill our brain with to tell us who we're not instead of telling us who we are. So today, as a professional butt kicker, one of my guests is known as a joyologist. And I'm really looking forward to see what happens when you cross a butt kicker with a joyologist of what you actually get. Tell you what, that's a tongue tripper, just like I was called a success specialist. And that's a word that I trip over too. As a professional speaker, there's no guarantee of what words are going to come out of our mouth. So today we welcome Pat Armitstead, if I pronounced it correctly. If I haven't, she's going to let me know very quickly. Welcome, Pat.
Thank you so much. Yeah, pretty close. There's two T's and it's really hard to pronounce. So, yeah, that's good.
That's like me with my surname of Pekar. I get, if I'm in a lower socioeconomic status, I get Pecker, which in Australia has a whole other meaning when you call someone a pecker. And yes, it's somewhere around the groin region, so it's not complimentary. And then the other version I get is Pekar, which is sort of in between. But then when I'm in the upper classes, I get Pekar and it's lifted up. So long as it's a lot better than any of the names I've been called while I was in law enforcement, I can answer to it. So now as a joyologist, let's let our listeners know what a joyologist actually does.
Well, a self-coined term that I created back in 2001 following a series of losses. Wasn't experiencing any joy, and rather than be medicated, looked for another way. And in that process, in the middle of a conversation with a magician from South Australia, I just had this message, and the message was, oh my God, we've got radiology, pathology, hematology, but no joyology. I'm going to be a joyologist. And so my search from then was really to, well, okay, that's all very clever, but what does that mean? So, yeah, really being on a search for what it is that brings people joy, and then developing tools and strategies to evolve that. Took me probably 3 or 4 years to build the IP and, find myself in a pretty strong place around expressing what it was that I wanted to do with that.
So if I coined it in a nutshell, I'd say, it's my philosophy, which is finding more ways to feel good and less ways to feel bad, because most of us get ingrained from a very early age of all the negativity or what's not working, or are reminded what our limits are very early on, and somehow we adopt and endorse and support those beliefs with our mindsets. And I'm all about rattling cages and shaking it up a bit so people are reminded more of what their unlimited potential and what their ideals are, that they can absolutely reach for anything that their heart desires.
Yes. Yes. We've got, we in our society, we honour IQ, we honour academia, and we honour sport. And all of the other intelligences don't get a look in. And I'm very much now about supporting people to be fully self-expressed across their own unique intelligence. And really love taking people on that path because probably, as you know, being the butt kicker, one of the biggest hindrances for that is, the level of self-doubt.
Exactly, not just self-doubt, but I'd also say the validation of cop-outs and justifications, because I hear from people all the time, oh, well, Rosie, that's okay for you, but, and then what follows is a long litany of endorsed excuses and pathetic programs that they're just buying into 100%. And I'll give an example. It was my son's birthday just last weekend, and we'd just been in a car crash, and my son had suffered concussion and been vomiting and quite ill. And he takes a lot of things in his stride and stays pretty joyful and pretty happy. And you wouldn't know he was a sick child at the best of times. And one of the ladies that presented, we just had a few friends come together for lunch in a particular club. And this lady went into a long litany of her programmed malfunction of her body. Let's say it's an acquired disease, an eating disease. And every time I attempted to challenge it by saying, there's much information, there's much evidence, if you should look, there are many available autoimmune positive responses. And every way I attempted to navigate this conversation, she met me with a brick wall, a really locked down, closed mind. And we meet people like this in life. We tell them of wonderful results other people are getting, amazing information and evidence that's out there, but they've already got the butt locked in their brain that might be relevant to other people, but it's not relevant to me. So as a joyologist, how would you counteract, or is that something that you choose to do, to challenge and counteract, or you find what's working for them and mold them in that way, or a different process entirely?
Probably a bit of a combination. I really see from my own journey, I had a really strong default identity that went to doubt, and in the face of that, persevered anyway and achieved a lot. But there was a level of achievement that just wasn't going to come through while I was, sitting in that lower space, if you like. And I think the biggest thing that supported me with shifting that was, at the time that I had all those losses in 2001, there were so many of them, and then my partner leaving, his last words were, "No, I don't love you, and I never loved you." And when he said that, I thought, oh, if that's true, then everything I've ever known is not true. And so I did disintegrate, and this journey forward has been a real reintegration, and I committed whatever comes up, I'm going to go to it. I
guess I just want to interrupt there, just for our listeners, that people, to recognize that often when people are hurt, there's the saying, hurt people hurt people. So it doesn't mean what they have to state or what they say whilst they are hurt is valid and real. It's just a reflection of the state that they're in, which most people are just starting to become aware of and identify with this emotional intelligence and emotional resilience. And one of our questions our listeners ask is, how do you know what is going to work? Now, I've got my answer for that, but I'm interested to hear what your answer is.
I think for me, I've become equipped over time to be able to I have a strong listening ability, and to be able to see how it is they're perceiving things, and to enable them to see another picture, to broaden their view, to look beyond that narrow focus and see something else.
So this is what you've developed for yourself, because I take it away from other people and I always put it back to ourselves. Like I use examples from my own life to say, what I've developed or what I've understanding, because someone else might be able to pick that up and use that same tool as well. So for yourself, that's the ability you've developed to be able to listen to what others are saying, to identify where they're coming from in their space, as opposed to adopting it as your own. Am I hearing that correctly?
I think I've had extensive life experience, a lot of it not good, but a lot of it amazing. And I think I am able to see now the contrast. So I can see challenge, and because I've shifted my perception, then I'm also able to see support almost side by side. And in that space,
I was going to say that's a wonderful point. I just want to highlight is the comment that you made that you shifted your perception. So that's a point of awareness that there is many more perceptions or views of the world than just one, which is important for listeners to become aware of, that even though they might have a chronic perception or a particular ingrained thought process, it doesn't mean it's stuck in stone. It's like climbing up a mountain. You know, you can look one way and see all what vista is in front of you, but you can turn around and see something completely different entirely. And how we change that perception is what you've just highlighted, your own awareness that even though there may have been a lot you can pay attention to that wasn't working and that didn't feel good, there also is a lot that actually is working and that is better than you may have anticipated.
Mm-hmm. In learning to shift my own perception, that was probably a fairly daunting process and a bit of a struggle initially, because you're fighting the inner critic, fighting the inner critic, fighting the head talk, moving beyond, I couldn't possibly have that happen. And even self-defeating beliefs, like for a long time, years, I've believed if it is to be, it's up to me. And that has served me very well. But I had a period of illness this last couple of years, and the whole idea that something might happen while I was sitting at rest was actually foreign to me. But indeed it has happened. So, and those things have occurred because of my shift, I believe.
Exactly. And I think that's powerful. Powerful phrase. I just want to reiterate for our listeners that, because they're asking how can we change the perception, and I think that's very important to become aware of. It's sort of like when you travel on any journey, if you're on Sydney going to Brisbane, or you're in Chicago going to New York, if you find yourself in LA or find yourself down in Melbourne, you're nowhere near the end point that you want to get at. So I think the indicator is, if you're playing with your thoughts, like you had your challenge of your inner critic, which you won't be alone in that. Most of us that have spent a few decades on the planet, and over 5+ of them, have had enough of our inner critic that we determine that it's time for us to direct what's going on instead of being at the receiving end of circumstances. But in directing that journey, I think the important part is, you said as your path, you want to find joy. You're a seeker of more things that feel better. And that is like setting your compass of what is true north, which again, I relate to, possibly heading to New York from Chicago. And so therefore, if you find yourself in the sunny parts of LA, you might enjoy bits of that. However, it's not near your end destination. So people can become aware that they're on the right path by, I think, more moments, feeling better. Is that how you found it for yourself, that you found more moments that connected, that felt better, or found more power in the moments to change your particular state?
Yes, in that first 3 months from that defining big period of losses, that's when the notion of the joyology came in. And I quickly went on to do 2 pilot programs, one a 3-month program and one a 12-month program. And because I was focused and because I was on that search and I was committed, whatever comes up, I'm going to it. And so the thing is, once we get to it, when we've been prepared to face it, then it's no longer there. Because we've in the way we're presenting ourselves, the barrier is let down, and,
I guess
we're
it's like
open
that
to
saying, fear knocked at the door, faith answered, and nobody was there.
Someone's commented there about finding the right path and doing what you're sent here to do. I was I wanted to be an artist. And my mother said, well, that's lovely, dear, but I really think you should get a proper job. And so it was that I ended up going nursing. I nursed for 16 years and I did love it. But of course, I never got a paintbrush out or did anything particularly creative. Not exactly the place for that. Left nursing and ended up in video production, producing commercials, working for 2020, 60 Minutes, and suddenly started to experience an incredible array of creative expression. Had that business for 11 years, and then with the evolution of joyology, really able now to meld my compassionate and creative self and serve humanity. And it's kind of taken a lifetime to see the perfection of that journey, that development of compassion itself, and the stories along the way. I've been an avid journalist over the years, and that's enabled me to see the paradox and the synchronicity, to see really challenging moments and notice when things happen or don't happen. For example, one time in that early period, there was a knock on the door one Saturday morning, and a fellow handed me some papers and said, I'm here to repossess the car. And in that first moment, I could have given up. But I think what I did was surrender. And in that surrendering process, the words just came out of my mouth, and it was, actually, no, you're not. Here are 3 good reasons why. These are the arrangements I've made with the hire purchase company. You help make the calls you need to make, and I'll wait here. So he comes back 10 minutes later, and I'm seeing him off the property, and we're joking as we walked up the driveway. And if I had long hair, I would have flicked it saucily because I said, oh, I have a real sense that I know you. And he's like, oh, yeah. And I said, you're on television. And he says, as a matter of fact, I am. And I said, well, it's got to be Xena. And he said, no, Hercules. And I said, well, look, I'm a makeup artist and I do some body painting. Maybe one day you'll let me paint you. And we both laughed our heads off.
I'm going to have to remember that as a pickup line. I'm going to invest in some body paints right now. There you go, America. There's your new fresh excuse for meeting that next cutie pie. I'm a body paint artist.
But what I got after that, I went off and I did a one-day training to learn how to use a handheld microphone and do special effects. And the chapter in the book that I'm writing at the moment is, the day they came to repossess the car is actually the day I found my voice, literally and figuratively. There was that encounter first thing in the morning, and if I had given up rather than surrender, I know there's probably a fine line for listeners, how do we differentiate that? He would have had the car, and it would have been really hard to reverse that process. So
the use of words is often very challenging in order to convey the meaning that we have behind things, because surrender is actually something I personally advocate for many people, only because so many people take on the business of their lives when there is much more going on. It's like every trillion of the cells of your being know how to do what they need to do perfectly without us putting our 2 bobs worth in, and we often mess up the process. And the same often with, as we follow our bliss and follow our joy, as many experts have stated along the way, things become more effortless and more easy. Yet for many old school individuals, easy and effortless somehow doesn't equate with value. We seem to do monuments and statues and give awards to those that did it the toughest and the hardest and had it the most difficult. And that's something I actually don't endorse and don't support, because it's aiding people to remain in resistance to their greatest good. And when you are in resistance, things persist until we let go of the things that are no longer serving us, which is surrendering and allowing our greatest good to unfold and be amazed and for me often astounded at the ease, the excitement, the exhilaration, the enjoyment, the effortlessness that unfolds. And that's how I enjoy my life. I like opening my inbox and everyone is asking me for my participation, my appearance at conferences, my roles as presenters in different things. I don't go out and chase a single person, which is different to how I did business over a decade ago. I would have my long to-do list, everything written out, all that I had to do. And I instruct people, by all means, if you're comfortable doing a to-do list, great, write it out. However, select only 3. You know, I'm a lazy person who likes to do the least and get the most. This is how I live my life. So I've written 5 books now. I'm featured in another 3. I've got several different media programs that are interested in my involvement. We've got our own already underway. And all of it has come through now what I call that level of effortlessness and ease. And it's simply by putting my focus on what feels good, what I enjoy. As you mentioned yourself, you found your creative process and married it with things that you've amassed and collected within your own awareness over the years. And that's what I recommend our listeners, certainly for themselves, because people will ask, what should I be doing? What's my exact thing? And there's no one size fits all. You know, the one thing that I recommend that does fit everyone is that smile on the dial and a more positive perspective that is surrendering to finding what's working instead of what's not working.
Yes. Some of the tools that I use with my clients to help them with identifying, you know, path, purpose, you know, finding, well, what are my strengths? You know, people can live in confusion. And I use Howard Gardner's theory of multiple intelligence. There's a little questionnaire people can do. And again, the top 3, I love your choice of 3. And then the same with Martin Seligman's signature strengths questionnaire, which is on his Authentic Happiness website, which identifies everybody's 24 signature strengths, and a fairly lengthy process, but it just gives you such a comprehensive outline of your strengths. And my suggestion to people is take your top 5, carry them with you everywhere. And even while life is not exactly as you would like it in this moment, if you're injecting that top 5 into the current workplace, if you're injecting that into your encounters with other people, your life is going to shift, you know, by merit of who you've been and what it is that you're expressing, which is in in those areas where you do have strength and you don't have to labour long and hard to find the words or the means of expression.
I guess that's a bit like the analogy I used before, that if you set your destination as New York from Chicago, you know as you see the signposts along the way that you're heading the right way. So if you've made that list and put your top 5 important, I guess, values or experiences or priorities within that list, and you start to see more and more signs of them, activate, we call it the reticular activating system. You know, you never saw a yellow V-dub until you start looking for one, and then you see them absolutely everywhere. So once you've paid attention, more and more of it starts to show up. And that's where I pay attention to what's easy and effortless. And as I pay attention to that, more and more things shows up. So some of the questions are, if you make the list, how can you have the motivation to get things done? And one thing I'd like to answer on that is, I don't believe so much in motivation, though people call me a motivational speaker. I was motivational as a cop because I had a gun, I had a taser, and I had handcuffs and a baton. So what I sort of said went. Once I become a professional speaker, they didn't let me take the gun and the taser, though I still take the handcuffs. And again, I can get things done, but people may not like you the way you get it done being motivational. When it's inspirational, it's sort of like an inside job. Like, you know, when it comes to Christmas time, you don't have to tell kids to wake up early and go search what's under the Christmas tree. They're inspired to do it. So the same, you know, if you haven't got a list that inspires you, I would suggest getting a better list.
Yep.
And there's other questions. Sorry, I'll just add this in.
That's right.
Do you have a book out there? Sorry, we're still talking over at the top of each
Yep.
other. I'll just ask these questions.
Sorry.
Do you have a book out there to follow to get things on a better track? And how did you get into the position you are in? Now, I'm not sure if they're directed at yourself, Pat, or at myself. So we'll let you answer first and then I'll give my answer.
Yeah, lovely. One of the things I became clear on in 2004 was that my core drivers are love, freedom, and spiritual intimacy, and that has not changed. That's been a really good fit, and that's what gets me out of bed. So when
Yes.
we can get really clear there, then that doesn't change, and it's only the finer points. Then we go into creation and develop that which we want to create. Yes, I have a number of books that I've authored and co-authored, but I think the one I might suggest here is called Anti-Zac. It was created following my tour with Pat Adams. I came back, very much changed by 16 days on tour with him. And Anti-Zac is obviously a play on Prozac.
Yes.
And it's a prescription, a joyful prescription for what ails society at the moment. So A is for amuse, N is for enthuse, cheating a little bit there, T is for trust, I is for intuition, Z is for zeal, A is for attitude, and C is for creativity. And the book is made up of chapters under those umbrellas and really designed to shift people's thinking around, where they are. Things are not looking great. Life has, been taking its toll. So there's a range of information and some activities after each chapter to endeavour to shift thinking so that they can see the good where before they were seeing none. So that's Anti-Zac.
And that sounds like a very powerful process, because some people get mired and stuck in a rut, which I call repeating those useless thoughts. Ex-cop, I keep things really simple and really blunt and direct and pretty in your face, because people know by the results in their lives, hey, this is what I want, or no, it's not what I want. If it's not what I want, you've identified it. So give yourself a pat on the back that now you're in a position of awareness. And from a position of awareness, you're at a point of power, which is this moment right now. And you can take that step forward to then being more selective of what you pick up from this point. There's the old story of, the snake handler that come across a snake at the bottom of the mountain, and the snake said to him, please, if you carry me over the mountain, I promise I won't bite you. And the snake handler's like, no, but I know you. That's what you do. You bite. And he's like, no, I promise if you do this for me, I guarantee you I will not bite you. So the snake handler thought, okay, well, I'm a bit of an expert on this, so I'll pick you up. And he took him on his journey, and they had, wonderful tales along the way, and, great friendship developed. And at the other side, he dropped him off, and the snake turned and promptly bit him. And the snake handler was aghast. It was like, after all we've been through and after all we've done, and your promise, how could you possibly do this? And the snake's simple answer was, you knew what I was when you picked me up. So again, we can con ourselves. We can think, no, this is just a little bit of denial. I'm just a little bit in debt. No, I'm just a little bit overweight. Yep, no, I'm just a little bit having difficulty here. And that denial, slapping a false happy face over the front of it, doesn't do anything unless we actually do that core work of playing with it and releasing it from our innards. And we do this to ourselves because, again, it's just a practice. It's repeating those useless thoughts, as you did earlier in your life with habits and things that weren't working for you, as I certainly did in my life. And those people I attracted around me, I saw wonderful examples of more of what I didn't want. Now, for our listeners, you're tuned in to Until Now with Rosie Pekar, and Until Now means simply that, all that we know up until now. From this moment, we might learn a bit more. From another moment, we'll learn even more than before, and that's a wonderful opportunity that we've got. And we talk on this program with ordinary people who've had extraordinary experiences. And if you want to join the chat, just go over to w4cy.com and click on the right-hand side on the link, And I've just got a couple more questions from listeners, as in, why do we do this to ourselves, and how do we make sure we stop making the same mistakes? So I'll hand this over to Pat, our joyologist, who's joined the butt kicker today, to make sure that we can get rid of those excuses and find more ways to feel good. So what would your answer be of why do we do this to ourselves?
Well, I believe now, at this stage in my life, that we are here to evolve humanity. Perhaps didn't know that when I was back being 16, 17. And, there's, what was my history was all of that conditioning through my childhood, schooling, all of those influences, which I took on to be true. And so that's a conditioning we take out into our lives. And then we meet adversity, obstacles, and we learn to, over time, to see things differently, especially if we get the repeating patterns. Things keep coming back into our lives. When I moved to New Zealand, I had 10 car accidents in 18 months. None my fault, honest. And,
So she says to the ex-cop.
Yes.
We'll let that one slide.
I think it was called crash karma.
Yeah, that tree was walking right in front of me. It was going at a rapid pace. Yes, I'm not one who ever believes in accidents. And I had my own accident last week, and I laugh at that because I'm aware how our energy states create. And as Abraham, who I absolutely love, that Esther Hicks channels, a conglomerate group of energies that states very clearly that your physical proximity to harm and your energetic proximity to harm are totally different. So I've been in environments where I've been exposed to the highest level of harm. I've been in environments where almost 200,000 lives were lost. I have been in environments with, the most notorious of our prisoners within Australia, and that was only just in the last fortnight down there in Melbourne. So my physical proximity has nothing to do with my energetic proximity. When I'm running on an energy that, things are tough, things are challenging, things are difficult, oh my God, does this have to happen now? Or I run into that victim mindset. It's interesting how these other energetic examples coincide at the same time. I remember when I was splitting with my husband was the only time I actually had a car accident. And I ran into another car. So again, no accident. My awareness is caught up in problem, difficulty, challenge, and I run into, not surprisingly, more problem, difficulty, and challenge. And I know that you get this, Pat, but I'm sharing it for our listeners so they get it really clearly. If there was ever the most important incentive to get from listening to any individual on the planet, it's how do I flip my energy switch? How do I alter my perception? How do I pay attention to my emotions? How do I tune in to something that feels better in the moment? And then that way, my physical proximity to things that might harm me is now becoming further and further and further away, matching my energetic proximity.
Yeah. Those 10 car accidents were waking me up to what I wasn't seeing in a relationship which ultimately ended. But I didn't know that at the time. So, there was that lack of awareness, I just didn't see it. And I think one of the things I'm really focused on now is to be able to share storytelling, my own and other stories, so that we don't have to always be hit by the Mack truck in order to learn the lesson.
Exactly. And I think as a, former ex-cop, I was the same too. I said to myself, I'd like to say that, I was a fast learner. However, the amount of times my face was rubbed into the bitumen and I'd say, Uncle, I give up. I give up, I tap out. That was sort of the lengths I would take the universe to before I would pay attention. So it marries in with one of the questions here is how do we make sure we stop making the same mistakes? Mine would be that awareness, like that analogy of where is your true north? Like Pat has said, what are your 5 priorities on your list of your feeling states that you're wanting to achieve? If you're paying attention to them, then you'll start to let go of the things that no longer serve you or aren't creating those states. And there's a question, is an answer an excuse or delivering the fact? Well, it depends if that answer is working for you or working against you. Like I mentioned, talking in the prison system only a couple of weeks ago, I met some people that had locked in, regimented, closed minds. And again, I was surprised. I'd forgotten people like this still exist on the planet. And I call them old dinosaurs because they're becoming extinct. Do you find that yourself?
Mm-hmm. Yes. You know,
yeah.
all of what we've been speaking about is, you know, an evolving consciousness. And, you know, for so many people, they're not connected to the cost. You know, what is this, whatever it is, costing you in your life? You know, and the repeated debt, the repeated bad relationships, the repeated, you know, perhaps redundancies. They're all telling us something, and you know the answer is back within. You can read, but we still need to do that inner journey, and you know take an honest and compassionate view of ourselves, and get connected to the cost. And when we do, then there's, like, for me, it's always been. I've always wanted to be first, and have been in the face of, you know, a range of things. And yesterday I was contacted by Pat Adams. I'm creating a new television program called The Laughter Channel, where human interest meets humour interest. And Pat has agreed to be patron and endorse the program. And that's been on my list, if you like, since 2005.
That's wonderful.
You know, passage of time and, you know, an immediate positive response. It wouldn't have come if I had been fearful.
Exactly.
If I'd been fearful, if I'd been worried, you know, you probably won't, then the answer may well have been quite different.
And I'll just clarify for the listeners that you did say Patch Adams, and that is Patch Adams from the movie. You know, he's a great example of finding humour out of any situation. And I'm aware, like in the US at the moment, you know, there's tragic experiences and that people are going through, be it, you know, forces of nature, forces of things that have been denatured, irrespective. People can go through these experiences either with a triumphant and even a joyful attitude, which I saw in Banda Aceh after the tsunami disaster. People were going out on dump trucks that had a tally collection of 500 bodies per day per truck. These people were going out and singing at the top of their voices. And you wonder, how can you possibly be joyful with such an inhumane, clearly debilitating task? They found a way to, and that joy is probably one of the highest states I've felt on the planet. And I've traveled globally and met with people all around the world in all sorts of environments and cultures. Never have I felt such ease and enthusiasm for one exceptionally difficult task that they were doing. And the grief and overwhelmment was surpassed very, very quickly and very fast. Whereas in the West, we're sort of indoctrinated and cultured into dragging it out every single day, flogging that same dead horse, dead cat, dead person, dead relationship, dead whatever it is, and lament it and bewail it and continue flogging it day after day after day. Now, it's not to say we can't go through grief and we can't express our emotions for these experiences. However, it is, as you mentioned earlier, it's costing us. It's costing us greatly every moment. Lamenting and spending in that pain and that suffering and difficulty is moments we've lost entirely to any joy, any lightness, not just for ourselves, but for all those we interact and impact with. So that definitely, for our listeners today, I think is an important message, that you're not at the mercy of circumstances. You're at the mercy of your mind. And it's the mind that matters most in your reality.
Yes.
And yes, I'll just answer a question here. They're saying, was Patch Adams a real person? Well, you probably don't want to call him a real dummy. He's going to be patron of your program. Don't say I said that.
Was and still is. So not Robin Williams, but yes, the real Pat Adams.
Yes.
And on my tour with Patch, an experience similar to what you've just been describing, we toured across Russia, visiting orphanages in Moscow and St. Petersburg, living in probably the most impoverished conditions that I've seen. No light bulbs, no toilet paper, no hand towels, no soap, dirt floors, living conditions and nourishment just incredible. And we would approach that. Our mission was to bring joy where it appeared there was none. And I returned from that trip feeling more vital and alive than I've ever felt in my whole life. And that was because I allowed myself to experience it all. There were joyful moments and there were such sad moments, but we were present to it all. And in being present to all of it, we were enlivened. Our clown's persona, if you like, was developed. Most people who went weren't, performing clowns. It was Patch said, don't come because of me, come because you want to come and find your clown self. So it was about, really hooking into. He said, I don't need a performer. I want someone who can come in and sit down beside somebody and make something happen. So one of my preparations for that tour was learning improv acting. And the first rule of improv is that first thought is correct. But our default mechanism in our brain, of course, says, I better not say that. If I say that, someone might get upset or it could be wrong. And off we go on a journey. Yet that first moment, that first thought is actually genius.
Yes. And just a couple of questions here. Rest in peace, Robin. Yes, definitely for Robin Williams. How old is Patch and why did things go so far from his ideas, which is Patch's ideas, and do you see us getting back to his teaching? Now, I don't think we'll elaborate too long in respect of Patch Adams because I think he's just one representative of which there are many representatives around the globe that I think each is a representative of being authentic in their own mode of how they find more ways to feel good. And as they find more ways to feel good, they develop their own fulfillment, like you on this path and this experience that you mentioned on this journey with him that you found very fulfilling within your life. And I think that answers a question that listeners had asked earlier. How do you know when you're on track? And I would go by your own emotional intelligence, that what you find fulfills you lets you know that you're running on something that is of value as opposed to running on something that doesn't serve you or have any value.
In some years back, I won $5,000 in 7 minutes on a game show, answering questions that I did not know the answer to. I just went with the improv skills and first thought is correct. And I won. And that was a real breakthrough for me for just how damn clever I am and how my filter before that, my filter had said, you don't know that, you don't know that. But with intention, I went on stage for the television show with the intention, worst that happens is I'm back in the corridor and the corridor is fine. And away I went, and the no stress either. They actually recorded your heartbeat, and you weren't allowed to exceed your predetermined heartbeat for your individual stress rate. And my heartbeat never altered from 88, even when they told me I'd won. So, when we can assume this level of presence, then we can hold ourselves in a very steady state. I love the word equanimity. In that equanimous state, we're not so buffeted by the storms, we just ride.
So would you say that was the most important new skill out of developing improv skills, or what would you class as just in wrapping up, what your most important gift you got and that you would share with listeners of how they can develop their own improv skills?
What I learned was, we can't all live a life in the performing arts, but we can all live a life enhanced by the performing arts. So stepping outside what's our normal parameters and exploring comedy, improv, lots of other, not just that area, but performing arts, brings us so many gifts, which broadens our experience of life. It heightens our awareness of our unique multiple intelligences and is a real indicator. The more we find joy in the experience of any one of those things, then it's a real indicator, as you mentioned before, of what's working, what fires us up.
If I've heard you correctly, it sounds like you're saying dare to do a little bit more and discover a little bit more of who you are as opposed to who you think you're not.
Yes.
That sounds
Absolutely.
wonderful. So Pat, is there a link that others can go to discover more about yourself and what you are doing?
Yes, if they go to joyology.co.nz, there's a range of information there on my site. Yep.
So that was joyology.o for Oscar.
.co, sorry.
Oh, .co. I thought I heard O, just as well. We got that clarified. So go to joyology.co, which is Charlie Oscar for phonetic spelling, .nz, because that's for New Zealand, as opposed to AU for Australia. And you'll be able to find out more about Pat and her upcoming program with Patch Adams as well, of finding or discovering for yourself how you can find more pathways to your inner joy, and your inner joy no doubt reflects your outer joy within your life. And for yourself, what one extraordinary experience would you say you've had that has really impacted your life?
Well, there have been a few, and I considered them, but perhaps the biggest more recently was working with a law firm in New Zealand, and they contracted me to support them to work with them on their client intimacy program. And that just blew me away. It was like, oh my goodness, a law firm and you want to do intimacy? And I had actually been giving presentations called Engaging with Intimacy. And I worked with this firm over a 5-year period, and ancillary staff, and then the lawyers, and there was a bit of resistance from the lawyers. Couldn't we call them friends? What's this intimacy stuff? And what happened for Kensington Swan was, they still retained that incredible professional persona, but there were changes like anyone who stepped out of the lift, the women on reception knew who they were before they even got to the counter. So just so much work with people going deep in their own strengths to be able to create all these joy spots at every client interaction. And by manner of who they were being, they ended up being the first law firm to be established in Abu Dhabi as a result of that process. The Abu Dhabians just opened the doors and did all that they could for the passage of that with ease and grace, as we've been talking about a lot. And all that shifted was who they were being at a personal level.
Exactly. And I think it's important for listeners to hear that in today's mode of existing, that authenticity creates connection. And when you actually create connection, then you have true community. And if you have a sense of belonging, that is a fulfilling value that individuals get, but it doesn't start without a connection. So I would challenge people within this following week to find what they connect to, which is your list of ideals, what are their values, and to use that as their true north to pinpoint, to find more ways to feel good and less ways to feel bad. I'm going to have to wrap up now, so I would really like to thank Pat Armitstead for being on today. And if you'd like to seek more about Pat, just go to joyology.co.nz and you can get more information there. And I'm thankful for all of our listeners on Until Now with Rosie Pekar or Pekar, depending depending on what group I'm listening to. And if you want more information on me, I'm easy. I'm at kickbutt with only one T. Otherwise, you've got a whole other butt. kickbutt.com.au. Talk to you all next week. Love you. Bye.